I want to start with a number, 93. Just sit with that number for a moment, because that number is the key that unlocks everything we are going to talk about today. 93%. That is the percentage of people who become Costco members and then choose to remain Costco members the following year, and the year after that, without any salesperson calling them, without any special promotion, pulling them back in, and without any advertising, reminding them to renew. And what makes that number so extraordinary? What makes it one of the most fascinating numbers in the entire history of business is not just its size, but what it represents. Because those 93% of people are not renewing a streaming service they can use from their couch, and they are not renewing a software subscription they need for their work. They are renewing the right to enter a building and spend more of their own money inside it. And they are doing this happily and enthusiastically, and with something that can only be described as genuine loyalty. And that loyalty, that deep, almost irrational emotional connection between a human being and a concrete warehouse that sells bulk quantities of paper towels and rotisserie chickens, is worth $4.5 billion every single year. And it flows into Costco's accounts before a single product has been touched, before a single cart has been pushed, before a single free sample has been handed out. And that $4.5 billion of pure predictable guaranteed recurring income sitting there at the foundation of the business before any selling has taken place is the engine of the most perfectly constructed money machine in the history of retail. And today we are going to go all the way inside it. We are going to trace it back to its roots, back to the man who first had the idea, and back to the moment when one counterintuitive decision changed everything. And we are going to extract from that story every lesson, every principle, every insight that you can carry with you. Because that is what we do on From Zero podcast. We sit with one company, one system, one story, and we study it until we understand not just what they did, but why they did it, and what it means for everyone who comes after. So let us begin where every great story begins, which is at the very beginning. And the beginning of this story starts not with Costco, but with a man named Saul Price, who is one of the most important and most underappreciated figures in the history of American business. And Saul Price had an idea in the early 1970s that was so strange and so completely against everything the retail industry believed about itself that almost everyone who heard it assumed he had lost his mind. Because what Saul Price proposed was this: what if you flipped the entire relationship between a store and its customers? What if, instead of the store needing the customers needed the store? What if instead of discounts and promotions and advertising being the thing that brought people back, the simple act of having already paid created a psychological bond so powerful and so durable that people would return again and again? Not because they were being marketed to, but because they had already made a commitment. And Saul Price understood something about human psychology that the entire retail industry had missed, which is that a customer who has paid to be somewhere is a fundamentally different creature from a customer who wandered in off the street, because a customer who has paid is motivated to get their money's worth. A customer who has paid feels a sense of ownership. A customer who has paid has made a public commitment to a relationship, and their brain will do everything in its power to justify and honor that commitment. And Saul Price took this insight, and in 1976, he opened a store called Price Club in a converted airplane hangar in San Diego, California, and Price Club was unlike anything that had ever existed in American retail, because it was not trying to sell to everyone. It was selling memberships to small business owners, charging them an annual fee to access products at prices so dramatically low that they seemed almost impossible. And the store made almost no margin on those products because it did not need to, because the margin was already sitting in the membership fee that every single member had already paid before they touched a single item. And this structural separation, this beautiful, elegant division between where the money came from and how the value was delivered, was the insight that changed everything, because Saul Price had found a way to put the store permanently on the same side as the customer. And one of the people who saw what Saul Price had built and understood immediately and viscerally and completely what it meant was a young man who went to work for Saul Price and who studied the operation the way a great student studies a great teacher, absorbing not just the tactics, but the philosophy, not just the format, but the values, not just the what, but the why and when. That young man was ready when he had absorbed everything there was to absorb. He took those lessons, and in 1983, in Seattle, Washington, he opened the first Costco, and his name was Jim Sinegal. And what Jim Sinegal added to Sol Price's foundation, what he brought that was uniquely and completely his own, was an almost religious conviction that the membership was not just a business model. It was a promise, and that promise was sacred, and the promise was simply this: we will never betray you. And understanding what it truly means to never betray your customer, and what that commitment requires in practice across thousands of daily decisions made by thousands of people across hundreds of locations, is the thing that separates Costco from every competitor that has ever tried to copy it, because the warehouse format is easy to copy, and the bulk quantities are easy to copy, but a culture of never betraying your customer lives, not in a policy document, but in the bones of the organization. And Jim Sinegal built that culture from the very first day, and it is still running today. Now I want to talk about the number 14, because that number is the second key in this story. And without understanding it, you cannot fully understand what makes Costco so different from every other retailer that has ever existed. And the number 14 refers to the maximum markup that Costco will ever put on any product in its entire store. And when I say maximum, I mean a hard rule, a sacred rule, a rule that Jim Sinegal treated with the same seriousness that a judge treats the Constitution, because that rule says that no product in any Costco anywhere in the world will ever be marked up by more than 14% above what Costco paid for it. And to appreciate why that number is so radical, you have to understand what the rest of the retail world looks like, because the average grocery store marks up its products by somewhere between 25 and 50%, and the average clothing retailer marks up by 100% or more. And some beauty and luxury categories see markups of 300 and 400%. And then there is Costco sitting at 14% maximum, never going higher, never making an exception, never allowing any product category to creep above that ceiling, no matter how much pricing power the market might offer. And the reason this matters, the reason this single number is so important to the entire story, is that 14% is not enough margin to run a business on. And Jim Sinegal knew that from the very first day. He knew that if you cap your product margins at 14%, you cannot cover your rent, your staff, your utilities, your operations, your technology, and your growth from product sales alone. It is mathematically impossible. And so the question every serious person asks when they first encounter this model is, how does Costco survive? And the answer is the membership fee. And this is where the architectural genius of what Jim Sinegal built becomes fully visible, because what he understood is that if the membership fee covers the cost of running the business, then the product margins do not need to cover anything at all. And if the product margins do not need to cover anything, then you can set those margins at whatever level makes the member happiest. And the level that makes the member happiest is as close to nothing as the laws of commerce allow. And so Costco set them at 14% and then protected that number the way a banker protects a vault. And what this creates in practice is something that sounds almost too good to be true, which is a store that has been structurally engineered to not profit from selling you things. And that structural reality is the reason that Costco's prices produce that particular feeling you get when you pick up a product and look at the tag. That feeling that the number cannot be right. That feeling that you must be misreading something because no store could possibly be selling this at this price. And that feeling is not an accident, and it is not a promotion. It is the direct result of a decision made in the earliest days of the company to build a business where selling things cheaply is not the revenue model, but the loyalty strategy. And now I want to tell you the story that more than any other single moment captures what this philosophy actually means when it is lived rather than just stated. And that story is the story of the hot dog. Because in 1985, Costco began selling a hot dog and a soda in their food court for $1.50, and that price has not changed since 1985, not by a single penny. Not through the inflation of the late 80s, not through the recessions of the 90s, not through the financial crisis of 2008, not through the supply chain catastrophe of the pandemic years, not through 4 decades of rising ingredient costs and rising labor costs and rising energy costs. And at some point in the company's history, someone from the finance team did what any reasonable finance professional would do, which is they looked at the numbers. They looked at what it actually costs Costco to produce and serve that hot dog. And they looked at the $1.50 price. And they walked into Jim Sinegal's office, and they told him the price needed to be raised. And what happened next has become one of the most repeated stories in the history of American business. Because Jim Sinegal looked at that person and said, "If you raise the price of the hot dog, I will kill you." And I want you to understand what he was protecting in that moment, because he was not protecting a food item, and he was not even protecting a price point. He was protecting a symbol, and symbols in business are worth more than most financial models can measure, because the Costco hot dog is not food. The Costco hot dog is a daily message delivered to every member who buys it. And the message is, we have not changed. We made you a promise, and we are still keeping it. And that message received by millions of members every single day builds something that no advertising budget could ever manufacture, which is the unshakable belief in the member's mind that Costco is genuinely and structurally and permanently on their side. And that belief is what generates the 93% renewal rate, and that renewal rate is what generates the $4.5 billion. And that $4.5 billion is what funds the entire operation. And it all traces back to a hot dog that costs Costco money to serve. And a man who understood that some things are simply too important to put on a spreadsheet, and that the moment you start making exceptions to your principles is the moment your principles stop being principles and become merely suggestions. And Jim Sinegal never allowed his principles to become suggestions, not even once, not even when the finance team had a very reasonable argument for why they should. Now I want to talk about Kirkland's signature, because if the membership fee is the foundation of everything Costco has built, and the 14% markup rule is the engine that keeps the promise alive, then Kirkland's signature is the moment where the philosophy becomes product and the product becomes proof. And understanding what Kirkland's signature actually is at its deepest level is understanding one of the most quietly brilliant and most consistently underestimated product strategies that any retailer has ever executed. Because most people, when they reach for a Kirkland product on those warehouse shelves, think they are making a sensible compromise. They think they are choosing the smart budget option, the practical alternative to the name brand sitting beside it. And they are wrong. And the truth of what Kirkland's signature actually is will permanently change the way you look at that simple, understated logo. Because Kirkland is not a budget alternative. It is in the majority of cases a superior product made by the exact same manufacturer that produces the premium name brand sitting directly next to it on the shelf, and the mechanism through which this happens is as important as the result itself. Because what Costco does is go directly to the world's most respected manufacturers, the factories and facilities that sit behind the most trusted logos on earth, and they make an offer that is structured in a way that is almost impossible to refuse. And the offer is this: we will order from you in quantities so large that your production lines will run at full capacity, and your unit economics will improve dramatically, and in exchange for that volume, you will make us a product built to our specifications. And our specifications will be higher than the specifications of the product you sell under your own name. And you will price it to us at a level that allows us to sell it to our members at a price that makes every competitor in the category look expensive. And because Costco's buying power is so enormous, because the scale of what they are offering is so significant, that most manufacturers genuinely cannot afford to walk away from the conversation. Those manufacturers say yes, and the results of those conversations are everywhere in the Kirkland product line. Because the Kirkland signature olive oil comes from producers whose own label products sit in the premium section of every specialty food store. And the Kirkland signature coffee is roasted by Starbucks. And the Kirkland signature vodka has developed such a devoted following among people who conducted their own blind taste comparisons with premium French alternatives that it has become something of a legend in the spirits world. And what this means for the member standing in that aisle is something profound, because they are not making a compromise. When they choose Kirkland, they are accessing a product that was engineered to exceed the standard of the name brand beside it and priced to make the name brand look like a luxury indulgence rather than a rational choice. And every time a member opens that bottle, or brews that coffee, or pours that glass and thinks quietly to themselves, "This is genuinely excellent," something happens in their relationship with Costco that is worth far more than the margin on any individual product, which is that their trust deepens and deepened. Trust renews memberships, and renewed memberships generate fees, and fees fund the machine, and the machine keeps running. And now I want to shift to something that almost nobody talks about when they analyze Costco, which is the physical design of the store itself, because the warehouse aesthetic that greets you when you walk through those enormous sliding doors is not the absence of design. It is design at its most intentional and its most psychologically sophisticated. And I want you to think about what you actually experience in the first 30 seconds inside a Costco. Because before you have consciously processed anything, your brain has already received several very specific messages. And the first message comes from the space itself, from the sheer scale of the ceilings and the width of the aisles, and the industrial quality of everything around you. And that message says, this place is serious. This place is not spending money on decoration and lighting and carefully curated music. And the reason it is not spending money on those things is that it is spending that money on your prices instead. And that message lands before you have looked at a single price tag, and it colors every purchase you make for the rest of your visit. Because you are already primed to believe that what you are about to buy is cheaper than it would be anywhere else. And then there is the entrance display, which is never groceries and never household basics, but always something large and exciting and dramatically priced: a television, or a laptop, or a piece of furniture at a number so far below what you would pay anywhere else that it stops you physically mid-stride and plants a number in your brain that becomes the emotional reference point for everything that follows. Because if Costco can save you $400 on a television, then the olive oil must be a great deal, and the running shoes must be a great deal, and everything in this building must be a great deal. And that feeling of comprehensive deal-making confidence that Costco engineers through the entrance display is one of the most effective and most replicable pieces of retail psychology ever deployed. And then there is the treasure hunt, which is the phenomenon that Costco members talk about with a genuine excitement that no traditional retailer has ever successfully generated, because Costco rotates a significant portion of its non-essential inventory deliberately and regularly, bringing in limited quantities of unexpected products, luxury items, seasonal collaborations, things that appear one week and are completely gone the next. And this creates an urgency and a curiosity and a reason to return that transforms the weekly grocery run into something that feels less like a chore and more like a discovery. And when your shopping trip feels like a discovery, you look forward to it. And when you look forward to it, you go more often. And when you go more often, you spend more. And when you spend more, you feel better about your membership. And when you feel better about your membership, you renew it. And the machine keeps turning exactly as it was designed to turn from the very beginning. Now I want to bring everything together, and I want to end this story the way every great story deserves to end, which is not with a summary of facts, but with a truth. And the truth I want to leave you with today is one that took Costco 4 decades to prove, but that was visible to anyone paying close enough attention from the very first day that Jim Sinegal opened those warehouse doors in Seattle in 1983. And the truth is, the most powerful competitive advantage that any business can build is not a patent, and it is not a technology, and it is not a location, and it is not even a price. It is trust, and trust is powerful. Not because it feels good, which it does, but because it compounds. And compounding trust behaves exactly the way compounding money behaves, which is that it grows slowly at first in ways that are almost invisible. And then it grows faster, and then faster still, until one day you look up and you realize that what began as a simple promise between a store and its members has become a $4.5 billion annual revenue stream that arrives before a single product has been sold. And I want to talk about the employees before I give you the final lesson, because no honest telling of the Costco story can leave out the people who actually run the machine every single day. Because in an industry that treats its frontline workers as the most replaceable and least important part of the entire operation, Jim Sinegal made a decision that was as counterintuitive as every other decision he ever made, which was to pay his employees significantly more than any competitor, to give them benefits that most retailers reserve for senior management, and to build a culture where promotion from within was not a slogan on a poster, but an actual practiced reality. And Wall Street hated this decision for years, because Wall Street looked at Costco's wage bill and saw profit that was being given away. And Jim Sinegal looked at that same wage bill and saw the foundation of something worth far more than quarterly profit, which was organizational loyalty. And organizational loyalty produced an employee turnover rate that was a fraction of the industry average. And every time Costco did not have to recruit and train a replacement employee, it saved money. And when you multiply those savings across hundreds of thousands of employees over 4 decades, the number becomes so large that the decision to pay people well stops looking like generosity and starts looking like what it actually always was, which is one of the most strategically intelligent financial decisions in the history of retail. And the lesson underneath that decision is the same lesson that sits underneath every other decision Jim Sinegal ever made, which is that when you treat people as the most important part of your operation, rather than the most replaceable, they behave like the most important part of your operation. And when your employees behave like the most important part of your operation, your customers feel it. And when your customers feel it, they come back. And when they come back, they renew. And when they renew, the machine keeps running. And now I want to give you the final lesson. And the final lesson from the Costco story is one that I think applies far beyond retail and far beyond business, and into every area of life where you are trying to build something that lasts. And the lesson is about the relationship between short-term thinking and long-term results. Because everything that made Costco great was a short-term sacrifice made in service of a long-term truth. And the 14% markup rule was a short-term sacrifice of margin in service of the long-term truth that members who feel they are getting an extraordinary deal become members for life, and the $1.50 hot dog that has not changed in price since 1985 is a short-term sacrifice of revenue in service of the long-term truth that a promise kept every single day for 40 years is worth more than any amount of money that promise could have generated if it had been broken. And the decision to pay employees more than the market required was a short-term sacrifice of profit in service of the long-term truth that loyal employees create loyal customers, and loyal customers create compounding revenue, and compounding revenue creates an empire. And Jim Sinegal understood all of this, not because he was smarter than everyone else in retail, which he may well have been, but because he was willing to think on a time horizon that most of his competitors and most of his investors were not willing to think on. And that willingness to sacrifice the short term for the long term, to endure the criticism and the analyst questions and the shareholder pressure, and to keep doing the right thing for the member, even when the spreadsheet said, do something else. That willingness is the rarest quality in business, and it is the quality that separates the companies that last from the companies that merely succeed for a while. And so the question I want to leave you with today, the question I want you to carry with you as you go back to whatever you are building in your own life, is this: are you willing to make the short-term sacrifice that the long-term result requires? Because Costco was, and the result is, 120 million members, and $4.5 billion in annual membership fees, and a hot dog that costs $1.50, and a renewal rate of 93%, and a money machine that has been running for 4 decades, and shows no signs of slowing down. And it all started from zero, with one man in a converted airplane hangar, who had a crazy idea about what a store could be if it truly put the customer first and never stopped. And that is the story of Costco, and that is the lesson of From Zero podcast. Because every empire was built on a system, and now you know this one.